I hope you enjoyed part one of 20 things that my husband was glad he did when our kids were little. We got a little bit of background or foundational information at the beginning of part one. Now we're going to be moving on to part two, the last few things that my husband had talked about on the radio that made such an impression on me, and I hope they're a blessing to you today. We're going to pick up with, we always made home a happy place.
Yeah. That's a beautiful necklace and matching bracelet you have on. Where'd you get that?
Oh, somebody that loves me bought it for me for Mother's Day.
He knows what he's doing.
He does.
He is. All right.
It's my boyfriend.
Yes, I am. Yeah, we always made home a happy place. There's always a possibility for tension and strife. Well, there's two sides of this. Number one, certain things we just never did. We never had slamming doors. We never had screaming. We never slamming things down. We just didn't have it. Now, did we have disagreements? Yeah, sure, certainly. Two human beings, you know, you're raising children and you haven't fully, when your oldest is or your firstborn is little, you still haven't fully figured out how to live with this other person that you just met a few years ago. And so you're still trying to crack all the codes of marriage. And so, especially when that firstborn is little, you're still figuring out marriage. So you're going to have all kinds of disagreements and things you didn't even discover yet that you discover and try to work through. It's going to gross you out.
I don't know what you're going to say.
But we were married a long time before I knew that in the bathroom we use different towels.
Oh.
Yeah, I just thought you grab whatever one that's closest to you. And one day it was revealed to me that no, this is yours and this is mine.
And I was mortified.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll adjust to that. But I'm just saying, you've been married. We had children. We had been married 3 years, nearly 3 years, when Catherine was born. We were still figuring each other out. And so there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be problems, and there's going to be the possibility for strife. But we were determined that we were not going to let our children see strife. They could see us disagree and talk things out because they need to learn how to talk things out. Right. But they were not going to hear us yell at each other and scream at each other. And so that's one side of it. The other side of it is just bringing the joy and the happiness. And I'm not talking about fake plastic. I'm talking about going to the Lord and getting the joy of the Lord in your life and carrying that, letting that overflow into our home. And so, again, and so many of these points depend on me just being a real, genuine Christian who's being renewed before the Lord every day. But bring that joy, the first three characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace. Those three right there will change every relationship in your life. If you're living a spirit-filled life, love, joy, peace will change everything in your life.
And it was easy then to teach our kids what a dread it was to have strife or anger. Our kids will tell you that if they ever slammed a door, I would make them go back and close it, open it and shut it 10 times.
Wow.
And
you're brutal.
You didn't know that? Well, the reason for that is, first of all, they could never see me slamming doors out of anger, or I would have had to been the one to open and close the door 10 times. But I wanted to teach them that having that strife and anger is going to cost you something. And when they were little, it cost them from getting to what they wanted to, getting to the place where they wanted to go or doing what they wanted to do, because they had to stop and open it and close it gently 10 times. But it was like such a foreign thing. And it was easy to teach them then to control their own spirits, because losing control of your spirit is going to cost you something. We worked very hard to control our own spirits, control our words, because it was the right thing to do, but also because we wanted our children to know home is a peaceful place.
Yeah. And then the other side of the coin or the other half of the same concept is to bring joy and happiness, to bring fun. And sometimes, you know, at the end of the day, you don't feel like bringing fun. You just want to relax. You just want to chill, or whatever you want to call it. And you have to bring the fun. You know, Dad comes home, and I realize this is primarily a women's channel, but Dad comes home and you're tired, you're worn out physically and or mentally, and you just want to go to your man cave or whatever. You just want to be alone. But your kids, on the other hand, they're excited to see you.
Right.
And I remember being a kid, and the house that we lived in, there was well, let me just say, I could hear the tires on my father's Ford pickup. I knew the sound of the tread, and even though there were all kinds of other vehicles coming past, I could hear the sound of the tread of my father's tires.
There was a bug. Sorry, got it.
Coming around the corner. I'm not kidding you. Half a mile away. And that, whatever I was doing, I stopped what I was doing to go and meet him at the driveway. I loved it when Dad came home. And your kids love it when you come home. And but you're tired and so forth. Anyway, make the effort to bring the joy, to bring the excitement, to bring the energy, to bring the happiness. Here's why. Here's the bottom line of this whole point. I came to see other kids that would do anything to be anywhere but home. Right. Kids that would invite themselves over to other people's. I mean, I would watch them go up to other people in church and say, can I stay over at your house? And the same kids always wanted to be at other people's house. And I would think, how come you don't want to go? What's wrong with your house? Right. And that's what helped me decide my house is going to be the place where our kids want to be. Now, we never let our kids do sleepovers. That's a different point altogether, I guess. But they never wanted to. They wanted to be home because home is the happy place. Home was the place to be. Another thing I'm glad I taught them to do, and I'm going to narrow these down so that we're not here for 3 days. But another thing that I'm glad I did was I always made a place for my kids. I always had time to give them my attention. I didn't say things. I hope I never said things. And if I did, I tried not to say things like, I'm too busy right now. I can't do that right now. Now, there were ways that I had to express to them. There's sometimes that you have to focus on a job. But I tried to do that while they were asleep, or I tried to do that even if I had to work late into the night or early into the next morning or before they got up in the morning, so that I wouldn't have to say the words, I'm too busy right now. Right. Because I didn't want to teach them that I was ever too busy for them. I wanted to enter into their world. I wanted to, eat those make-believe cookies or whatever, build. I wanted to see the palace that they were creating or whatever. And so I wanted to make a place for them. I wanted to, there was no TV show that I had to watch. And again, we didn't have very much variety in TV. Most of what we watched was planned, and it was, when they were small, it was VHS. And but most of, so it was planned. So in other words, there was no video that I had to see that I couldn't watch with them in the room. So go in the other room, I got to watch this. They could sit right on my lap. We could sit together and watch this together. And I remember a good lady in our church, she knew we didn't have TV. So she recorded 6 hours on VHS of Blue's Clues. And our kids just absolutely loved that. So I would sit and watch Blue's Clues with my kids because they loved it. And I'm not endorsing Blue's Clues. I don't know, if there's some horrible moral problem with it or whatever, but it worked for us. And I would sit and watch with them and have fun with it and not gripe about it. I'm glad I made a place for them, made time for them, and entered into their world. I'm glad that we taught them to not have tantrums. That's very important. When they were little, I called them fits. We would say no fits. Right. And we taught them, And listen, it wasn't just about not having a tantrum in public. It wasn't just about not embarrassing us at a restaurant or in the store. I didn't want that to be who they became. I'm afraid a lot of times people try to correct tantrums because their kids are embarrassing them.
Right.
And you can tell when somebody's in public and their kid throws a fit, throws a tantrum, you can tell by how they correct them that they're not doing it at home. They're just doing it because they're in public and they're embarrassed. And we taught our kids no fits at home. And I'll tell you this, if you teach your oldest not to have fits, it's so much easier with the children that come after them because they're looking to them as a pattern. And so they're not going to learn how to do it because you taught your oldest to not do it. I realized, and we realized when our oldest was little, that if we don't do the hard work and deal with this now, we're just going to have to change who they are later. So we're not going to let them throw tantrums now. So we would say, no fits, no fits. And you might have to say that 1,000 times, and you might have to discipline them accordingly with whether or not they obey when you say no fits. But they've got to learn that screaming and throwing a tantrum is not going to accomplish anything but bring them more sorrow.
And there was a philosophy too, and I know some people still do this, but when a child is having a fit, throw a cup of cold water in their face or do something to like shock them out of it. And we realized early on, you know, our kids through their lives are going to have things come their way that make them angry. Is there always going to be somebody there to throw a cup of cold water in their face?
Just tell the teacher, if he throws a tantrum in class, just throw a cup. Yeah.
So we had to teach them from the time they were toddlers. You're going to have to get control of your spirit. No fits. And how to help them work through it. I didn't leave them alone in a room to wail on the floor and kick it out until they wore themselves out. They can't do that as adults. And I think as a society, we are now seeing the product of kids who were left alone to scream it out or had something to try and shock them out of it instead of teaching them how to govern themselves.
Yeah. And I don't know how, if you're watching this and you don't know Jesus Christ, you don't have the Spirit of God living in you, and you say, well, how do I do that? I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. But I know that with the Spirit of God living in me and the Bible and the Spirit of God manifesting Him in love, joy, and peace, if I have peace, I can teach my child peace.
Yes.
I don't know how you do it without the Holy Spirit of God. But with the Spirit of God, which if you know Christ, you have Him, you can teach your child peace. It's part of who you are. I'm also glad that I didn't tolerate my kids saying that's not fair. And not just because it's annoying, and it is annoying. And not just because it's inconvenient. It's hard to make things fair. That's not the point. I don't want them to make that's not fair to be their mindset. And so I want them to learn to deal with the unfairnesses of life. Life is not fair. And I cannot micromanage every circumstance of your life to be fair. I can't take everything in life and cut it into 3 perfect pieces, one for you, one for your sister, one for your brother. I can't make everything, and you can't make everything fair for your children. So I need to teach them that life isn't fair, and I need to build you to deal with the unfairnesses. So that when you go to that first job and right away you see, oh, they're getting special treatment, you know how to deal with it because your parents taught you how to deal with it. So I'm glad I taught them and worked at not tolerating them saying that's not fair. That's not fair isn't even a factor. That's not part of life. And so we didn't tolerate it. I'm glad that I raised my children to not whine. And whining comes naturally. And all 3 of my kids hate this story. My wife probably hates this story. Not story, but example. And that is, we spent a lot of time, the 5 of us, we spent a lot of time in the car together. And so it was a common scenario. Me and my wife sitting in the front seat, 3 kids in the back seat. And you put 3 kids in the back seat, there's going to be some negative interaction. And eventually somebody's going to make a report. And so when any one of my kids would go, and it's always the same tune.
Yep.
And the tune is something like this. Mommy, he keeps hitting me. And I don't know where they learn that tune. Maybe like a bird, they're born with it as their instinct, but they all know that tune. And so I wrote my own words to that tune. And it went like this. Me, 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 me. My wife hated it. All 3 of my kids hated it. They would laugh. They would give me the token laugh because I had won their hearts. But they all hated it.
Superpower.
And so that's how it would go. It would go, Mommy, she keeps touching me. And I would immediately, me, 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 me. And it ultimately cured them all of whining because they didn't want to sound like Daddy. But it's hard.
Annoying.
Yeah. I don't want to be that annoying. And so it helped cure them of the whining. You say, well, wait a second. What about he's hitting me, she's touching me? That had to be addressed too. Those are 2 separate issues. One of the mistakes we make is we treat child rearing like it's court.
Right.
So
Yeah.
one guy makes the accusation, so now we've got to find out who's right and who's wrong. Well, if he's hitting her and she's whining, you're both wrong. And so we need to deal with both wrongs independently. We're going to deal with your whining first, and by the way, they then learned that eventually Dad's going to deal with the other person too. And so they both learned that Dad's going to deal with the whining, and then he's going to get to me next. And so that no good deed is going to go unaddressed. And so, yes, you got to address, but it's not okay, you're guilty, you're innocent. And then now I'm done, leave me alone. No, it's a matter of, first let me train you not to whine, and now let me train you not to hit. And you don't do it in one session. You do it consistently over time. And then just like everything else, you can't be a whiner. You can't.
Right.
How come they don't da 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 da?
Right.
Whatever. You see something happen. The same driving. And listen, every adult's guilty of this. How come, look at that guy. He's doing 90 miles an hour. How come they don't pull him over? Okay, now you're whining, Dad.
Right.
So you gotta toe the line, set the example. But I'm glad that I didn't raise our children to whine. And the whole whining thing leads me to number 11, which is in dealing with a lot of our kids' conflicts with each other, or even with other kids, many times my response was, you take care of you. I thank God that I understood. You hear parents say, well, my dad always said, or my mom always said, well, if you're going to have your kids quote you, you've got to have a consistent message. So my consistent message in dealing with conflicts was, you take care of you.
Yeah.
And I wanted that to ring in their ears when they had a conflict. You take care of you. You can't control what the other person does. You got some kid at school who's giving you a hard time. You can't go to school and fix it. I suppose you can go to the teacher or the principal, but first of all, most of the time that's not productive. And most of the time that sends a very wrong message to your kids. Now, you should be willing to stand up for your kids. You should be willing to, to go to battle when necessary. But the truth is, in child rearing, those times are very rare.
Yes.
Very rare. And you better pick your battles.
Right.
Because if you do it once a semester or once a year, you're going to be first of all, you're going to be the parent that they don't listen to anymore. And secondly, you're training your kid, instead of dealing with the problem, to get somebody else involved. And that's not the person that I wanted to raise. And so I wanted to teach them a principle. You take care of you. You can't govern other people's actions or words. You can govern your own. Another thing I'm glad I did is I'm glad I taught my children the right principles of life. Life is all about principles or the lack of them. And some people that you disagree with, and we're talking here about Christian principles and right and wrong, and the two are inseparable. So most of the people that you disagree with, they don't necessarily have different principles. They have no principles. And this is this is very much a Bible-based point of view. But the difference between right and wrong is not the difference between, most of the time, it's not the difference between good principles and bad principles. It's the difference between principles and no principles. Right. Most people can't tell you what their principles are. Yes. Most Christians can't tell you what their principles are. So you have to think them through, write them out. You can't have knee-jerk principles. There's no such thing as knee-jerk principles. Right. In other words, you can't make them up as you go. You've got to think things through. And your kids are going to ask you pointed questions at times. And my kids still, all three of them will say, what do you think about this? Or let me run this past you. And man, I want to be a few thoughtful steps ahead of them, even as they're adults. And so I'm glad I taught them right principles. Was I as thorough as I should be? I hope so. But you're always teaching. I'm glad I taught them right principles. I'm glad I taught them right priorities. And you teach right priorities by how you live. My mother taught me, and I don't know why this was a priority to her. But one reason I'm a pastor and one reason I am unbending on Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, is because my mother was unbending on Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Nothing got in the way. Yeah. Nothing was a higher priority. And what's strange was, my grandparents, her parents were tremendous people. I loved them dearly, and they were God-fearing people, good Christians, but they did not practice Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Her siblings did not practice it. I don't know anybody in her immediate life. Her friends didn't practice it. I don't know why it was so important to my mother. And church was until they built the interstate, it was a 30-minute drive. They built the interstate, it became an 18-minute drive. I know it was 18 minutes because that's how long I had to memorize my memory verse on the way to Sunday school. So I had that time down good. But I'm saying it was a drive to get to church. So I don't know why it was such a priority, but it was. And I'm glad it was, because that's who I am. But she didn't tell me, and praise the Lord, she didn't send me to church. There was no bus ministry or bus route anyway. But she didn't tell me it's important to go to church. She showed me. And that's one example of a priority. And you and we wanted to teach our children the priorities of life, and I'm glad that we did. Also, I'm glad that I've stayed in love with my wife. And now she's indescribably lovable. So it's not like it's been this hard, terrible burden to stay in love with her. But love always takes work. And it takes effort. It's not this emotion that just happens. And it's not a matter of staying in love as in, I love her, so I haven't left her yet. It's a matter of being deeply in love. And the greatest gift you can give to your children is to be deeply in love with your spouse. Dads need to be deeply in love with their children's mom. And moms need to be deeply in love with their children's dad. And that takes work. It takes mental work. It takes emotional work to keep your mind and heart where they need to be to stay in love with your spouse. And I'm glad that praise the Lord, that I've done that. And I have a wonderful, wonderful wife. Praise the Lord, by His grace, because I have stayed in love with my wife, my children's mom.
When Catherine was born, and I've told this repeatedly, and I've said it in a video here before too, but when our oldest daughter was born, I held her and I looked down at her little face and I made her 3 promises. And the first promise was that I would do everything in my power to stay in love with her dad and keep him loving me. And that the promise number 2 was that I would not be too proud to get help if I needed it. And I meant help even in our marriage or with our home or raising her. And I have had several counselors in my life and people who, in my opinion, have done things right and have been down the road a little bit farther than I have. And I've asked them hundreds and hundreds of questions. But the third promise that I made to her is that I would not pass my baggage on to her. And I also made those same promises to our son Joey and our daughter Amanda when they were born. And now I came from a broken home. My husband, his parents are still married. They will celebrate 60 years of marriage in just a few months. But I didn't have that great picture to watch of how you stay together and how you do it. And I'm so glad that we both resolved that even though he came from a stable marriage, I did not, that we resolved to fix things in each other, you know, him allowing God to fix things in him and myself allowing God to fix things in me, to enable us to be even where we could think about trying to be good parents for our kids. I think a lot of people just get married and think things are just going to happen. They're just going to have these babies, bring them home, and just everybody grow up together. We realized we had to work on ourselves first, and we had to have a strong bond first, and we had to have great love for each other first. And we did the hard work of making sure that was the kind of relationship we had then. And that's why almost 30 years later, we still have that kind of relationship.
As my children got older, I'm glad that I taught them about trust. Here's what I mean. The older they get, the more they're making their own choices. And of course, I'm still guiding them in making the right choices. They know, because they love and respect me, they still want to please me, but they also know there's some things that they want to do that I may or may not give them permission to do. So I let them know, each of them, at the appropriate time. I began to let them know that you are going to be the steward of trust. I may not have called it that, but in other words, I trust you to do the right thing. I believe in you. I believe you'll make the right choices. I believe you know what's right. But if you violate that trust, you will lose it. I will trust you less. If you are a good steward of that trust, then I'll trust you more. And praise the Lord, each of my kids were good stewards of their trust. They kept the rules. And on occasion, they'd come to me and confess things that, you know what, Dad, I'm sorry. I did this. I made this mistake. And boy, that just multiplied my trust in them. And they never played me or anything like that. But I'm glad I let them know that I trusted them, but they would have to earn more trust, or they could make the mistake of having trust taken away. Trust comes with maturity. You don't say to a 4-year-old, I trust you, or he'll wind up, touching the stove or jumping out a window or wind up walking in the middle of the road. Trust comes with maturity. But there came a point, around some trust by the time they're 10 years old, some more by the time they're 13, and more by the time they're 15 and 16, where you let them know over time, you have my trust. If you want more, keep the trust you have. I'll trust you more. And they've been phenomenal, praise the Lord, at doing that.
We didn't leave them vulnerable to fall into things. We had rules. And
Right.
In fact, with electronics, do you mind mentioning about leaving their things?
Yeah, when my we didn't get them cell phones until they were 16, all 3 of them, and it's tough. And anything you do that's related to an age, it's very easy to all of a sudden get into the that's not fair thing. So you decide you can't have a phone till you're 16. Well, all of a sudden the other two want one. Now our kids didn't do this because they had already learned not to say that's not fair. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of, well, it's not fair to give one a cell phone and not the rest. So, and you're saying, I remember the same thing with my daughters. And I don't know how you feel about pierced ears, but we just told our daughters that they couldn't get their ears pierced until they were 10 years old. And so when Catherine got her ears pierced, it was a big event. It was exciting. We were happy for her. But then Amanda had to wait till she was 10. It's real easy, again, to fall into that's not fair trap. And well, look, if you made the oldest wait for something and you don't make the youngest wait for something, who's that not fair to? It's not fair to the oldest. So you can't play that stupid game. And so anyway, the rule was when you turn 16, we'll get you a phone. Now, yeah, this was earlier on in the cell phone game. I know that. But I feel like if our kids were growing up even now, where, you know, every adult, every child, every animal has a cell phone, I think we would still hold that line. I haven't really thought that through, but I'm pretty sure that I would do that. Okay, so once they got a cell phone, they had to leave it downstairs when they went up to bed. They couldn't have it with them. Now that was a very short period of time because all three of them, when they turned 18, they were off to college. And so that was about a 2-year window where they learned to discipline themselves. You can't just lay in bed and start, you know, it's a dangerous thing to lay in bed and have access to the whole world. Anything can happen. And so they had to leave their cell phone down on the counter when they went to bed. And various things like that. They knew at any given time that we could look at their cell phone. We paid the bill. They live in our house. And I know a lot of times that's used as in an authoritarian way. I never slam my down here. Hey, you live in my house, I paid the bill. We never did that. It was just a common sense thing that they knew that, hey, we can look at that thing anytime. And we very rarely did. I would have to say almost never.
Yeah, just a few times.
Yeah. One of my children, there came a point where they came to me and said, would you do me a favor just to keep me accountable? Just occasionally ask for my phone to look at it. And I really admired and appreciate that.
Me too.
But, so yeah, that's how one of the ways that we enacted this matter of trust. Number 16. That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But I'm glad that I didn't embarrass my children. I'm not saying I never embarrassed them. I'm sure I still embarrass them now when I make certain faces or certain voices or sing certain songs from back in the day. But what I mean is I made it a point not to discipline them in public and to try to not to put them on the spot. As a preacher, it's very easy to use your children as illustrations, and I tried to never ever do that. But more important than that, if there was an issue, let's say we were at a restaurant sitting around a table, and one of them did something wrong, I would try to get their eye and just let them know by a glance, even a glare. Something inconspicuous, let them know. As simple as that. And they knew what that meant. And they didn't press the issue. It's not, when you instill the right things in them, by the grace of God, I hope we did. When you instill the right things in them, they're not going to respond to that with, well, I know you're not going to discipline. And they didn't know that I wouldn't do it. They knew that I didn't do it. Does anybody understand that? So it wasn't a matter of, I'm going to go ahead and just make an idiot of myself because he won't correct. I never told them I wouldn't correct them in public. I just didn't do it. We'd address it when they got home.
Yes.
We would deal with it later, but I wasn't going to embarrass them. I didn't want embarrassment to be a weapon that I used to make them foolish. And this is part of winning their hearts. This is part of always being a refuge for them.
Right.
I did not want to be a predator to my children in public. I did not ever want in any public setting to turn on them. Obviously, I didn't want to turn on them at home either, but you know what I'm saying. I didn't want to be their adversary, their antagonist in any public setting. I wanted them to know Dad's got my back. And so I didn't reprimand them or discipline them in public or say things in front of people. We'll talk about this when we get home, young man.
Yeah.
I mean,
we had both seen people who were more concerned about parenting in front of other parents than actually parenting their kids.
Yeah.
And we decided we didn't want to do that.
Yeah, so I'm glad I didn't embarrass them. I'm glad that I taught my children that people are more important than things. And this is going back to the early on days, I guess, but somebody took something, somebody touched something. Okay, I'll deal with them. But listen, people are more important than things. Your relationship with your sister, your brother, is more important than the thing that they won't share.
Yes.
And I didn't use words like relationship with a 3-year-old, but I'm explaining the concept here. I wanted to teach them, and I did. I would say a lot of times, people are more important than things. Now, that's hard to back up when it's your things.
Right.
When they've taken something of yours and broken it. And all of a sudden, you've got to stand by that. People are more important than things. You've got to believe it. You've got to live it. And so we tried to teach them that, and I'm glad we did, that people are more important than things. And I think with all three of them being adults, I think they have that point of view. Don't get all bent out of shape over a material object that can be replaced or you can live without. It's better to live without a material thing than it is to live without the love of your sister or of your brother. I'm glad that we taught them to be participators. And we didn't want our kids to be the ones that are always find an excuse to sit on the sidelines and watch everybody else play ball. Always sulking.
Right.
Even if they're not included, even if they're picked last for a team, I wanted them to be participators. I wanted them to volunteer for stuff. And it's an easy opportunity if you're a pastor and a pastor's wife, because if you're not a pastor's wife, this is not me griping. This is reality, and I could give you literally 100 examples of this, that especially when you start a church, the pastor's family does pretty much everything. And they're happy to do it. That's why they're there. Right. And so it's a great opportunity. We started out in a rented building. And so part of our regular routine was setting up folding chairs, taking them down, and moving things around. And so the kids were happy to participate in that. They didn't sit on the side and say, that's adult work. That's other people's work. They were participators. So we taught them to do things, to volunteer, to jump in, to do the hard work, to do the dirty work, to be early, to do these things. All of that is part of being a participator.
Right.
When someone is habitually late, they are telling people that I expect someone else to do the preparation, and I'll come in and join the party when I feel like it. And we didn't want to raise our kids that way. Plus, when you allow your kids to be habitually late, because usually you're habitually late, so you pass it on to your kids. And when you do that, you're handicapping them in school, you're handicapping them at every job they ever work. And so one of the best things you can do if you're about to have kids is to kick that tardiness problem. Get over it, beat it, get there early, and teach them. Your kids adopt the identity of, we're the people that get, I'm a person that gets there early.
Right, and we should go. Yeah.
I'm the person that gets there late. I'm the person that makes other people wait. I'm the person that expects other people to prepare for me. you are training them which one they are. And so I'm glad that we taught our kids to be participators.
You're either training them to be a contributor or to be a critic.
Yeah.
And that's what a lack of punctuality does.
Number 19, I've always worked to listen to them and not to laugh at them. Your kids come to an age, you know, we all talk about those horrible teen years where they're afraid to tell you stuff. Now, part of that is I guess unavoidable, maybe. Let me throw this in before I forget. When your kids get to that age where they're not as open with you as they used to, just open the door for them to talk and leave it open. Don't pry. Don't nag. Just, you know, okay, so you're home from school, you're in the kitchen, whatever, and used to, he or she would freely talk about their day, and now all of a sudden you notice they're hesitant to talk about stuff. Make sure they know they have the opportunity, and then leave it alone. Don't go down that road of, you used to tell me everything and now you hardly talk. That is not helping a thing.
Right.
So open the door with, did you have a good day? Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And then go about your business. And let them open up. Okay, but that was sort of point B on this. Point A is this. Always listen and don't laugh. And let them talk about it. Let them give their opinions. Ask their opinion. Value their opinion. You can't fill every request and you can't implement every idea. But you can listen to everything they have to say. And you can make sure you don't laugh at them. When he says that there's a girl in his third grade class and he thinks she's kind of cute, don't say, oh, he'll never tell you again, or he'll begin to not tell you anymore. So let him talk. Oh, wow, what's her name? And, you know, we act as if, well, if I act interested, they're going to run off and get married. Yeah, they're going to elope in the third grade. That's not a concern. I wanted our children to be creative. I wanted them to have ideas. I wanted them to write poems, write songs. And if they're going to be creative, then I cannot laugh at them. And so that means whatever they draw, whatever they build, whatever they write, I have books, you know, little booklets in my office that are things that my kids wrote when they were in first, second, third grade. And I cherish them to this day. And I didn't disregard them when they brought them home. I don't think most parents do, at least wise parents don't say, oh, that's so stupid. But we've got to go the extra step of valuing what they do and telling them that you think that is awesome. That is great. I love that. Listen to their ideas. Listen to their creations. And if you squelch their ideas, they'll stop having them, or they'll stop sharing them with you. Doesn't mean you have to take every little script they write and try to find a Broadway producer that'll make it into a show. No. But you can admire it, and you can steer it into, that is awesome. Man, maybe you're a writer. Keep writing, man. You'll keep having ideas, and I can't wait to hear the ideas that you have, that kind of thing. I'm glad I always listened to them. I'm glad I didn't laugh at them.
You can't criticize. I mean, as parents, we cannot criticize intellect, creativity, or physical appearance. Those three areas will just cut off communication, like, and then you'll be left wondering, like, what did I say?
Yeah.
Or doesn't my opinion matter? No, at that point it doesn't. a critical parent loses the heart of their child. And I've talked with many young people who were made fun of over their intelligence, or they tried to do something maybe out of their comfort zone and they were made fun of, or over the way they looked. And those are very hurtful things that they don't forget.
Yeah, the reason we fall into that trap is because we play the comparison game.
Yes.
Get out of the comparison business.
Yeah.
You know, some other parent who, don't forget, is exaggerating, tells you about some accomplishment of their child. And then your child brings an effort in the same category, and you instantly say, oh man, that's not going to be as great as theirs. And so you're comparing, and you make your child feel stupid for not measuring up to that other kid's effort, when it's not about comparison. I'm not trying to make you better than other kids to make me look good. I'm trying to help you reach your potential.
Yes.
And I don't care how that compares to anyone else.
Yes.
Last thing, I'm glad I've let them make their choices and then own them. And another way of saying that, I'm glad I've worked to teach them to be decisive. Now, this is another one that's going to sound comical, but this is the truth. We would go to an ice cream store, all right, in the town that we lived in for a long time, the ice cream store. And if you live in the Northeast, you know this name. There was a Carvel. There was a Carvel that has been there for years and years. I talked about the interstate before. I remember being about 5 years old and then building the bridges of Interstate 84 over top in this massive gap in the town of Brewster. And underneath that gap, before that highway was ever there, was the Carvel stand. My father's father, Joe Vasic Sr., used to take me to that Carvel. And my favorite thing was a root beer float. And so we'd walk in there, and he was a gruff old guy, and he loved his beer. And we would walk in there, and he'd say, "What do you want, Joey?" And I'd say, "I'll have a root beer float." And he'd say, I was 5 years old, he'd say to the lady, "Give him a root beer float and give me a Schaefer float." And Schaefer was his favorite brand of beer. And the lady would look confused, and he would make fun of her. But that's how long Carvel has been there. So we would go to Carvel when my kids were young. And they knew if you ordered a flavor, you were sticking with that flavor. It was almost like, is that your final answer? Because once you gave it, there was no switching. And my son will tell you to this day that he knows that his marriage is for life, because when he was young, he was made to pick straw or chocolate or vanilla, and he was not allowed to change. And that was my goal. I wanted to and let me say, I wasn't a bear about it. I wasn't mean about it. It was just, they knew once you pick, you pick. And I wanted my kids to be decisive. And so I'm glad that my kids were decisive, but then that they had the liberty to make their decisions. I bought several instruments over the years for my kids, hoping they would learn to play them, but that they decided not to play. That's fine. It wasn't, I made an investment and no, they didn't want it. That's fine. My son, on the other hand, just picked up a guitar one day and went miles and miles past me in guitar playing because it was what he was choosing. And so I'm glad that I have allowed them to make their choices, and I've been able to be behind them in their choices. I did try to fill their lives with things that they could choose from. I, in my son, helped instill an interest in trucks, because I thought if he is a God-fearing truck driver, I would love that. And he didn't choose to go that route, and a number of other things. But he had a variety of things to choose from. And the same thing with my daughters, and of course my wife, more in that direction. She gave them a variety of things to choose from as interests, to choose at and say, this is who I am. and they made their choices. They own their choices, and I support them 100%. And I'm glad that I've done that. Now, I probably could list another 100 things, and I could make a long list of things that I wish I'd done, or wish I'd done better. But I'm glad for what I did, and pray that the Lord has used it. I believe He has, and will continue to use it by His grace. And when it's all said and done, Lord, please have mercy. Please have mercy on our effort.
Just in closing, I will say that some of the things that we've discussed today, or that my husband has shared, and I've just added a little bit, but there are things that we wish somebody would have shared with us. Some of these things we figured out trial and error, or just saying, how does God parent us, and those kinds of things. One thing you didn't hear us say is that when our kids woke up, we made them read the Bible. The Bible has always been, obviously, a huge part of our lives. We did have family devotions every night, but I know that that's something that has been taught on extensively, and we, in many areas of our lives, our philosophy is it would be better for our children to see us doing right things and watching how it's supposed to be and inspiring them to have their own spiritual walks than to make rules about a spiritual walk. All three of our children today, they're all grown. I know they have a relationship with the Lord. It's their own. It's unique. It's even different from each other. But we did not micromanage their connections to God. We let them have their own. We worked on our own connections to God. In the same way that there are a lot of things that mothers teach their daughters to do for their dads, that I said, you know what, I think I'll do better if they just see me doing those things. And also, the opposite is true. There are just some things that our kids, our son, watched their dad do for me, instead of saying, son, you go do this for your mother. That was just our philosophy more of us doing it and showing them the way. I hope by this talk today, we certainly haven't made anybody feel that one avenue or another is right or wrong or any of those things. This is just what we did. We have both shared with our own children and other people too. You don't have to do things the way we did it.
Right.
But you could, and you'd be happy.
Yeah.
We are very happy with who our children are as adults. And as far as that goes, I would change all the bugs being out here today. But as far as our children go, I wouldn't change anything about who they are as people. We love to be with them. We miss them when they're not around. And we're enjoying who they are and what they contribute to life. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every moment that is spent watching these videos. And in case you wonder, I haven't mentioned this in a while, but my husband is the editor-in-chief and he makes them watchable, so I appreciate that. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.